This is the first lesson, the second endgame plan. In the previous lesson, I've told you about the two main endgame plans. You should attack the opponent's weak pawns and you should use your passed pawns. In this lesson, we'll analyze the second plan in details. I'll tell you about different types of passed pawns and how you should use them more effectively. Here is the first example, and it's the white's turn. What should white do now? The position is quite complex and white has a lot of ideas. White can attack the d3 knight and push it away. White may try to capture the h3 bishop. Black has the back rank problem, and so on. Now I'll tell you one very important thing. You know two correct endgame plans: to attack an opponent's weak pawns and to use your passed pawns. It automatically means that all other plans are not good. You should just realize the plans you know. Don't be distracted by something else and other seemingly attractive plans. In this position, white has the passed pawn a2. In such positions, you should always try to push the pawn forward. This should be your initial thought when you look at such a position. If you can't push the pawn right now, you should ask yourself, how I can prepare it to push my passed pawn on the next turn. If you realize this plan very insistently, you will definitely get great results. So in the game, white played a4. Bishop h4, threatening bishop takes f2, so white has to protect the pawn. Bishop e3, f5, g takes, g takes. Okay, now white has some free time, thus he should push his passed pawn, a5. Black answered f4, bishop d4, e3, f takes e3 is forced, bishop f2, king h1, and knight e1. Black is suddenly threatening mate. Bishop g2 is coming. White has the only move, rook takes, bishop takes. Okay, the forced liberation is over, and it's the white's turn. What should white do now? The answer is simple. Advance the passed pawn, a6. Bishop e6. Black is threatening bishop d5 check, so bishop f3, f takes, bishop c8. The first move white should think about here is a7, bishop b7. Okay, white can't play a8 right now, therefore white should think about how to neutralize the bishop b7 and the rook e8. Knight e7 helps white to do it, and after rook e7 and bishop takes b7, white is winning. Black can prevent a8 move and white will create the new queen. In this game, black had a strong counterplay. White was able to gain a victory only because of his persistence. White focused himself on the advancement of his passed pawn and realized this plan successfully after all. Okay, in this game we have seen a separate passed pawn. Now let's talk about the connected passed pawns. Two connected passed pawns have a great power in an endgame. First, they protect each other and support the movement of each other. Next, they control all the squares forward and not allow an opponent to blockade them. This allows them to go forward even without a piece's support. The next idea, they often can bring you a new queen. Usually your opponent can blockade a single passed pawn. At least he can sacrifice a piece for that pawn. Two connected passed pawns often can bring you a new queen. It's even not simple for an opponent to sacrifice a piece for them. And the next interesting idea. Two connected passed pawns on the 6th rank are stronger than a rook. Though it's the black's turn, black can't stop the pawns. After something like rook e1, e7, king g2 and d7, white will promote the pawn. It shows again the power of two connected passed pawns, and it illustrates that two connected passed pawns on the 6th rank is stronger than a rook. If you know that two connected passed pawns on the 6th rank are stronger than a rook, you should easily find the wise combination. Knight d8, rook d7, knight takes f7, rook takes f7, and e6. Black has two rooks against white's passed pawns, but he can't stop them anyway. For example, after rook f8 and d7, white is threatening e7. If black removes the rook somewhere, let's say rook a8, white will simply play rook takes b6, and black has no defense against the maneuver rook c6 and c8, promoting the pawn after that. Okay, let's go back. Black may try rook f6, but it doesn't help either. Then white will push e7, rook e6, and rook takes b6. On the next move, white will play rook b8, and then e8 queen. And this will bring white a great material advantage. Okay, let's go to the next example. It's the black's turn, and black has to take a decision. What do you think about it? What should black play now? A lot of players would play rook c4 or rook a2 here, which is a terrible mistake. As we already know, the stronger side should avoid pawn exchanges. Moreover, after rook a2, rook takes b7, and rook takes a4, black has the only passed pawn, which is not very powerful really. White will play rook a7, and it should be a draw. Let's go back. We can see that black has two connected pawns on the queen side. Potentially, they can become two connected passed pawns. In such positions, you should put your best efforts to get connected passed pawns. I'd like you to pay serious attention to this idea. One of the main winning plans in an endgame is to create connected passed pawns. As you know, the main way for a win in an endgame is to promote a pawn. Single passed pawn often doesn't have enough power to become a new queen. Connected passed pawns have great chances to bring you a new queen. It's very difficult for your opponent to stop connected passed pawns. It's quite hard even to sacrifice a piece for two connected passed pawns. Let's imagine that there is no pawn on a4 and black has two connected passed pawns. In this case, white has no chances. White can sacrifice the rook only for one pawn, but the second one will become a queen anyway. We may conclude that two connected passed pawns can guarantee you a win. Okay, let's think about the current position. Though it's hard for black to win the a4 pawn somehow, but it's the only black's chance for a win. Black will need to bring the king to the queen side, protect his b pawn, and then take the a4 pawn. During this time, white will take a pawn or even two pawns on the king side. However, black shouldn't worry about it too much. Two connected passed pawns should guarantee a black's win. Let's imagine the game continuation. First, black should play rook b2 to save the b7 pawn. Then he needs to attack the a4 pawn, so black will play rook b4 and b6. I'll make any moves for white just to see the black's plan. By the way, white has no real plan anyway. So black will play rook b4 and then b6. White will answer rook b7 to keep the pawn b6 under the attack. After that, black needs to transfer the king to the queen side. First, black should play h5 to remove the pawns from the same rank and to make it harder for white to take them in the future. Then black will move the king to g7, then to f6, to the e6. And finally, black will play king d5, threatening king c5. Sorry, king d5, I mean threatening king c5. White will take the f7 pawn, rook takes f7. Black will take the a4 pawn, rook takes a4. And this position should be winning for black. Black has two connected passed pawns on the queen side, and one of them will become a queen. At the same time, white needs to make a few more moves even to create a single passed pawn, which is not so powerful. I hope that you caught the key idea. One of the main winning plans in an endgame is to create connected passed pawns. That's why it makes sense to do it even if it's hard to realize this plan. Two connected passed pawns can guarantee you a win. Okay, let's talk about the next type of passed pawns, a protected passed pawn. It's a passed pawn which is protected by another pawn. In this position, white has a protected passed pawn c5. Such passed pawns give you a stable long-term advantage, because your opponent can't neutralize it somehow. When you have a separate passed pawn, your opponent can try to attack it and to capture it. When you have a protected passed pawn, your opponent has nothing to do about it. Okay, there are two main plans in the positions with a protected passed pawn. First, you may simply push the pawn forward. If you can do it, that's great. However, often your opponent is blockading your pawn and you can't push it so simply. Then you need to use the second plan. You should start attacking another weakness, perhaps on another side of the board. Your opponent has to use some pieces to keep control over your passed pawn. If you start an attack on another side of the board, you'll be able to easily get an advantage there. You can use all your pieces there, while your opponent only a part of them. That's why the second plan is very effective. Here you shouldn't hurry up with advancement of your passed pawns. This threat will always keep your opponent under pressure, and you may wait for the most favorable situation for you. Let's see how white used his protected passed pawn in the current example. Knight e5. White wants to exchange the c6 knight and to push his passed pawn after that. Black played knight b8, trying to prevent this plan. Really, it's not that simple for white to advance his passed pawn now. Black is ready to play f6 and then to bring the knight back to c6. That's why white decided to use the second plan, and he played rook d3. White is going to attack another weakness in the black's position. White can play rook a3, attacking the a6 pawn, or rook g3, taking the king side. Rook c8, rook e1, bishop f6. Black focused all his pieces on the queen side to blockade the white's passed pawn. That's why white decided to transfer an attack on another flank, on the king side. So white played knight g4, knight c6, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop g3. White is threatening bishop h4. You see how it's simple for white to develop an attack on the king side. White has all the pieces there, while black's pieces get stuck on the queen side. King g7, bishop h4, rook g3 check is coming, knight e7, g4, and white is taking the f5 square under the control. And by the way, now white is threatening rook f3. So black played knight g6, bishop g3, a5, and bishop d6. The white's plan is quite simple, to play f4, f5, and break through the black's defense. Black can't really do something about it because he still has to blockade the c5 passed pawn. For example, if Black plays rook e8, White will push the pawn immediately, c6 and then c7. That's why the White's position is easily winning, and he won the game soon. Okay, I'd like you to pay attention to one interesting aspect. In this game, really, White didn't push the pawn until the end. However, this threat has wielded powerful influence on the whole game. It helped White to keep an opponent under a constant pressure and to almost paralyze him. The next type of passed pawns is a distant passed pawn. It implies that a passed pawn or a potential passed pawn is on another side of the board comparing to an opponent's king. In this position, White has a distant passed pawn on the queen side. The White's plan is quite simple. White will create a passed pawn on the a file. This will force Black to move the king there to blockade the pawn, and during this time White will take the Black's pawns on the king side. We have already analyzed a very similar plan for the positions with a protected passed pawn. Your passed pawn deflects the opponent's pieces and allows you to develop an attack on another side. In both cases, you shouldn't push your passed pawn too early. This threat is keeping your opponent under a constant pressure, and you should wait for the most favorable situation to execute the threat. For example, in the current position, White should improve his position on the king side first, and only then move his queen side pawns. In this case, something like this may happen. Then White will create a passed pawn on the a file, deflect the Black's king, and will quickly promote a pawn on the king side. White will go with the king there, take the Black's pawn, and promote his own pawn. This example is certainly very simple. Nevertheless, it's important to understand it deeply because it's the bottom line for all the positions with a distant passed pawn. Since we have analyzed this plan already, I will not say much about it. I'll tell you only one important practical rule here. It's not a well-known idea, so please pay attention to that. Everyone knows that when you trade the pawns, you should take in the direction of a center. However, in an endgame, an opposite rule works. You should take aside from a center, because it helps you to create a distant passed pawn. In this position, Black took a takes b3. In a middle game, you should take in the direction of a center, a takes b3. However, in an endgame, you should take c takes b3, which is much more powerful. After that, White has a distant passed pawn on the queen side. It gives White a simple and effective winning plan: to trade all the pieces and to win a pawn endgame using a distant passed pawn. I have just created this position. I have already showed you how this plan works. Now you may stop the video and analyze this position by yourself to be sure that you can win it for White. The last thing I'd like to discuss in this lesson is a pawn majority. Though it's not a passed pawn actually, but it will give you a passed pawn in the future. That's why these topics are very closely connected. Therefore, the rules for a passed pawn and for a pawn majority are very similar. The first rule states, if you have a pawn majority, you should push it forward. A pawn majority is your advantage, and you certainly should use it. The second rule, you should move a pawn without a counterpart first of all. This is the easiest way to create a passed pawn. Nemtsovich called a pawn without a counterpart a candidate pawn. Well, it doesn't matter how to call it, it's important to push it. White has a pawn majority in the center. The e-pawn has no counterpart, so white should move it. e4. Certainly black can't take the f4 pawn because of queen d8 mate. So black played g6, then e5, knight h5, and knight d5. And putting the knight on the active square and protecting the f4 pawn. Bishop d8, f5. White uses his pawn majority. Queen d7 and f6. Though it blocks the white's pawns, it cuts off the black's pieces, the knight h5 and the bishop d8. Okay, what is the white's plan now? It's still the same, to advance his pawn majority. White will play f4, f5, and then e6. King f8, b3, protecting the a4 pawn, bishop c7, queen e4. White wants to put all his pieces on the best squares first, and only then to move his central pawns. Since black has no counterplay, this is a correct strategy for white. Bishop b8, then h4, h6, knight d2 e3, queen d8, king g2. White is transferring the king into the center. King g8, king f3, queen c8, king e2, and queen d7. White placed all the pieces on the most active positions and now starts realizing his main plan, to advance his pawn majority. He played queen g4, and after queen d8, f4, a6, f5, queen e8, f takes g6, f takes. Finally, white got two connected passed pawns and a simply winning position. Knight d5, preparing the e6 move. King f7, knight e7. Now white is threatening to take the g6 pawn. Black has no sufficient defense, and black should resign here. The only thing white really did in this game is that he advanced his pawn majority. It was enough for a convincing win. Okay, let's finish with that and draw the conclusions. There are two main endgame plans. The first plan, you should attack the opponent's weak pawns, and the second plan, you should use your passed pawns. In this lesson, I've been telling you about the second plan. Well, general, everything is very simple here. You should create passed pawns and move them forward. More specifically, there are 5 types of passed pawns: a separate passed pawn, connected passed pawns, a protected passed pawn, a distant passed pawn, and a pawn majority. Each type has some special properties. If you have a separate passed pawn, you should move it forward, and you need to focus yourself on this plan. Two connected passed pawns have a great power and often can give you a new queen. A protected passed pawn gives you a stable advantage. An effective plan is to use the principle of two weaknesses and start an attack on another side of the board. In an endgame, you should take a side from a center to create a distant passed pawn. Similar to the previous item, you may use the principle of two weaknesses to tear an opponent's defense. When you have a pawn majority, you should push it forward. First of all, you should move a pawn without a counterpart. Okay, these are all the main ideas related to this topic. They will help you to decide what you should do in any endgame position. You should use them as a guideline.